Did you know that Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers was initially dismissed as one of 1997's biggest disasters, earning a measly $54 million domestically against its $105 million budget? Yet it's now considered by film scholars to be one of the most brilliant satirical masterpieces ever made. While critics savaged it with reviews calling it cheerfully lobotomized and devoid of taste and logic, something extraordinary was happening that nobody saw coming. Between 1999 and 2013, Hollywood would spend over $460 million trying to recreate what they thought Starship Troopers was: big-budget sci-fi action spectacles with military themes. But every single one of these films failed to understand what made Starship Troopers actually work. They saw the surface, the action, but completely missed the secret ingredient that would transform Verhoeven's apparent failure into a timeless cult classic that grows more relevant every year. So, what did Starship Troopers get right that billion-dollar Hollywood kept getting catastrophically wrong? Today, we're breaking down the strategic brilliance behind cinema's most misunderstood masterpiece. What made Starship Troopers work? The genius of Starship Troopers wasn't that it was secretly smart. It was that it was obviously smart to anybody paying attention, while still functioning as pure entertainment for those who weren't. Paul Verhoeven, a filmmaker who lived through the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, understood something that escaped every other director who tried similar material. Effective satire requires perfect commitment to the bit. Verhoeven's personal history played an important role in the film's success. Growing up in wartime Holland, he witnessed firsthand how propaganda worked, how ordinary citizens could be convinced to support authoritarian regimes, and how seductive the promise of power and purpose could be. From the opening propaganda broadcast modeled directly on Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will to Neil Patrick Harris literally wearing an SS uniform in the final act, Starship Troopers telegraphed its intentions with surgical precision. The film opened with children stomping on cockroaches while their teacher applauded, immediately establishing that this society views violence against others as wholesome family entertainment. The recruitment ads promising citizenship through service were not subtle. They were precisely as obvious as real propaganda, which is almost never subtle either. The "Would you like to know more?" segments were masterfully crafted parodies of wartime newsreels, complete with the booming narrator voice and manipulative editing techniques. Each segment revealed more about the Federation's authoritarian nature, while maintaining the upbeat, patriotic tone that makes propaganda so effective. But the brilliance was in the execution layering. Verhoeven cast impossibly beautiful actors from soap operas and teen shows: Casper Van Dien from Beverly Hills 90210, Denise Richards from Melrose Place, Dina Meyer, also from 90210. Not because he couldn't afford better actors, but because propaganda films always prioritize genetic ideals over acting ability. He deliberately did not tell his cast that they were making a satire, resulting in performances that were simultaneously sincere and artificial, perfectly capturing how people sound when they've been completely indoctrinated. Van Dien delivered lines like, "I'm doing my part," with genuine enthusiasm because he believed in his character's patriotism. The film worked as both a spectacular action movie and a biting commentary. The bug battles were genuinely thrilling, featuring cutting-edge effects that still hold up today. Phil Tippett's creature designs, building on his Oscar-winning work from Jurassic Park, created aliens that were both terrifying and convincing. Nearly half the film's $105 million budget went to effects, and every dollar shows on screen. But crucially, the technical excellence served the satirical purpose. The bugs were designed to be completely unsympathetic. No cute moments, no individual personalities, no redeeming qualities whatsoever. They existed purely as objects for humans to destroy, which was exactly how propaganda typically presents enemy forces. The more spectacular the bug battles became, the more they revealed about humanity's appetite for violence against the other, where the failures went wrong, missing the point entirely. Battlefield Earth provides the perfect contrast to Starship Troopers' approach. John Travolta's passion project, based on L. Ron Hubbard's 1982 novel, cost $73 million to produce, but earned only $29 million worldwide, one of the most spectacular box office disasters in cinema history. The film had remarkably similar themes to Starship Troopers: humans fighting back against oppressive alien overlords who view Earthlings as inferior beings. But where Starship Troopers deliberately exaggerated its militaristic elements to expose their absurdity, Battlefield Earth genuinely believed in the heroism of violent resistance against tyranny. The fundamental problem was sincerity where satire was needed. Travolta, a devoted Scientologist, saw Hubbard's story as a genuine tale of liberation and heroism. The film presents the human rebellion as unquestionably noble, their violence as justified, and their victory as triumphant. There's no irony, no questioning of the cost of war, no examination of what victory actually means. The Cyclos are cartoonish villains with no redeeming qualities, making the moral equation simple: kill aliens, save humanity. The result was a film that looked accidentally satirical while trying to be sincere. Travolta's performance as the alien Turl was so over the top, complete with dreadlocks, platform boots, and maniacal laughter, that audiences laughed at it rather than with it. Supernova demonstrates what happens when studios try to engineer success through committee. Originally conceived by William Malone as Dead Star with H.R. Giger designs, the project cost $90 million to produce but earned only $14 million worldwide, a catastrophic loss that represented one of the worst budget-to-earnings ratios ever. The film went through so many rewrites, director changes, and reshoots that the final product had no coherent vision whatsoever. Walter Hill was hired to direct, then fired. Jack Shoulder was brought in for uncredited reshoots. Francis Ford Coppola was hired for editing. Hill disowned the film so completely that he used the pseudonym Thomas Lee in the credits. The film could not decide if it wanted to be a horror movie, a space adventure, or a psychological thriller. The plot involves a rescue mission that discovers a mysterious artifact with reality-altering properties, but the execution jumps wildly between different genres without committing to any of them. The casting reflected this confusion. The actors looked lost, because they were. Nobody knew what kind of movie they were making. Wing Commander was another disaster, failed because it had no identity beyond being a wannabe Star Wars. Despite having the direct involvement of game series creator Chris Roberts, who wrote and directed the film, and a $30 million budget, the movie earned only $11.6 million worldwide, barely one-third of its production cost. The film was nothing more than a generic space adventure with subpar effects and wooden performances. Roberts, a talented game designer, had no understanding of cinematic storytelling or character development. The film's plot was painfully derivative. Young pilot joins elite squadron, falls for his commanding officer, learns to believe in himself during climactic space battle. These story beats had been done countless times before and done better. The characters were walking archetypes with no personality beyond their basic function: hotshot pilot, stern commander, loyal wingman, exotic love interest. Freddie Prinze Jr. and Matthew Lillard tried their best, but they were working with material that gave them nothing interesting to play. The film's special effects were particularly damaging to its credibility. While Starship Troopers used then cutting-edge CGI combined with practical effects to create believable alien creatures and spectacular battle sequences, Wing Commander's space battles looked cheap even by late 90s standards. The spaceships moved without weight or momentum, the explosions lacked impact, and the alien Kilrathi looked like a rejected design from a low-budget TV show. Intentional archetypal characters. Stealth, released in 2005 with a massive $135 million budget, earned only $79.3 million worldwide, making it one of the worst financial losses in cinematic history. The film perfectly demonstrates why Starship Troopers' character choices were so brilliant. Director Rob Cohen tried to create realistic military pilots with complex backstories and emotional depth, casting Josh Lucas, Jessica Biel, and Jamie Foxx as elite fighter pilots working with an experimental AI aircraft called Edie. The characters had detailed personal histories, romantic subplots, and individual motivations that the filmmakers believed would make them more compelling. The result was actually the opposite. The characters were so generic and forgettable that audiences couldn't remember their names 5 minutes after leaving the theater. Lucas played Ben Gannon, a standard-issue Maverick pilot who breaks rules but gets results. Beale's Kara Wade was the obligatory tough but vulnerable female warrior. Fox's Henry Purcell was the loyal wingman whose main purpose was to die heroically in the second act. These were not characters, they were checkboxes on studio executives' diversity spreadsheet. The film's approach to military culture was equally superficial. It presented fighter pilots as generic action heroes rather than examining what kind of mindset military training actually produces. There was no commentary on warrior culture, no examination of how military institutions shape individual identity, and no understanding of how propaganda works within military hierarchies. The pilots questioned orders when convenient to the plot, but never in ways that revealed anything meaningful about military psychology. Starship Troopers took the opposite approach, creating intentionally archetypal characters that worked both as entertainment and as satirical comedy. Johnny Rico wasn't just the all-American jock. He was a perfect representation of how fascist societies recruit through appeals to traditional masculinity. Carmen Ibanez wasn't just an ambitious career woman, she embodied how authoritarian systems co-opt feminist ideals to serve their own purposes. Dizzy Flores was not just the girl next door who loves the guy who doesn't entice her, she represented the loyal citizens who sacrifice everything for a system that views them as expendable. These were not failures of characterization. Instead, you could see them as perfect representations of how propaganda films reduce complex human beings to simple, relatable symbols. The genius was that Verhoeven made these archetypes both emotionally effective and thematically purposeful. Audiences could care about Johnny, Carmen, and Dizzy as people, while simultaneously recognizing them as products of a system that strips away any individuality. The boot camp sequences demonstrated this perfectly. Drill Sergeant Zim, played by Clancy Brown, with perfect authoritarian menace, and the recruits who survived training all look exactly alike, thought exactly alike, and responded to commands with identical enthusiasm. That's not accidental. It was exactly how military indoctrination worked. And Verhoeven showed it without judgment, letting audiences draw their own conclusions. When Dizzy dies in Johnny's arms during the Planet P invasion, it's genuinely heartbreaking because Dina Meyer had made her character's love for Rico feel authentic. But it's also a perfect illustration of how fascist societies consume their most loyal citizens. Dizzy joined the military for love, served with distinction, and died for the Federation's war of aggression, all while believing she was protecting humanity. Her death is both tragic and inevitable. The system she served was always going to destroy her. After Earth provides a modern example of how this archetypal approach can go catastrophically wrong. M. Night Shyamalan's film cost $130 million to produce and earned $243.8 million worldwide, which sounds successful until you realize the massive marketing budget meant the film needed at least $350 million to break even, making it a significant financial disappointment. Shyamalan cast real-life father and son Will and Jaden Smith as Cypher and Kitai Rage, military officers who crash-landed on abandoned Earth. The film tried to create a serious father-son bonding story, with Will Smith playing a cold, emotionally distant soldier, and Jaden playing his eager-to-please son desperate for approval. But without the satirical framework that made Starship Troopers' emotional manipulation work, the result was simply manipulative in an unpleasant way. Will Smith's character was supposed to be a hardened warrior who learns to connect with his son, but he came across as an abusive father whose emotional coldness traumatized his child. Jaden Smith's performance as the son was widely mocked, but the real problem was that the film asked audiences to root for a family dynamic that looked genuinely unhealthy. The film's military culture was presented without irony or examination. Cypher Rage was celebrated as the perfect soldier, whose ability to suppress all emotion made him an ideal warrior. The film never questioned whether this kind of emotional suppression might be psychologically damaging, or what it means for society to celebrate people who've trained themselves not to feel fear or any emotion, apparently. It asked audiences to admire a character who had essentially lobotomized himself in the service of military efficiency. Most damaging, the film's central relationship between father and son was built on the father's complete emotional unavailability. Cypher shows no warmth, offers no encouragement, and responds to his son's desperate attempts to connect with a cold military assessment. The film presents this as noble stoicism, rather than recognizing it as a form of child abuse enabled by military culture. Audiences were supposed to find it moving when Cypher finally showed pride in his son, but the moment did not feel earned because the character had been so consistently cruel throughout the film. The power of controlled contradictions. One of Starship Troopers' most sophisticated tricks was presenting audiences with contradictory information that gradually exposed the lies at the heart of its fictional society. The film created a complex web of logical inconsistencies that only became apparent to viewers who paid attention to details rather than just absorbing the surface-level propaganda. The most obvious contradiction involves the bugs' supposed capabilities. The Federation simultaneously claims that bugs are unintelligent animals driven purely by instinct, while also crediting them with the technological sophistication to launch asteroids across the galaxy with pinpoint accuracy. Military intelligence refers to the bugs as having no technology and operating on pure biological imperative, yet somehow they managed to aim a meteor from Klendathu, located on the opposite side of the Milky Way galaxy, and strike Buenos Aires with perfect precision. This contradiction becomes even more glaring when you consider the physics involved. The distance from Earth to Klendathu would require the asteroid to travel for millions of years at sublight speeds, or require faster-than-light propulsion that exceeds humanity's own technological capabilities. The film presents this as if it's a simple matter of the bugs throwing rocks, but the reality would require scientific knowledge and engineering capabilities far beyond anything humans have ever achieved. The Buenos Aires attack itself raises uncomfortable questions that the film deliberately does not answer. How did Earth's orbital defense grid, shown efficiently destroying meteors in the opening propaganda segment, fail to intercept this particular asteroid? Why was there no advance warning from the deep space monitoring systems that would be essential for any spacefaring civilization? The film hints that someone with access to Earth's defense systems would have had to deliberately allow the attack to succeed. This strategy of controlled contradictions was completely beyond films like Wing Commander or Stealth, which presented their conflicts at face value without any deeper complexity. These films showed clear good guys fighting obvious bad guys with zero moral ambiguity or hidden layers. The human pilots were heroic defenders of Earth, the aliens were monstrous invaders, and there was never any question about who deserved to win. Saturn III, despite being much older than the other failures, demonstrates how not to handle contradictory information. The 1980 film cost $10 million to produce, but earned only $1.5 million worldwide, an almost unprecedented level of commercial failure. The film tried to be a psychological thriller about artificial intelligence, introducing a robot called Hector that was supposed to be both protective and threatening. But the film couldn't decide whether Hector was malfunctioning, following its program too literally, or being corrupted by human psychological patterns. The result was a confusing mess, where audiences couldn't understand what was happening or why. Harvey Keitel's character, Adam, was supposed to be menacing, but his motivation shifted randomly throughout the film. The robot Hector was supposed to be the primary threat, but it spent most of the movie standing around looking confused. Kirk Douglas and Farrah Fawcett's characters were supposed to be sympathetic, but they made so many inexplicably stupid decisions that audiences just stopped caring about their survival. Starship Troopers avoided this trap by establishing clear rules for its satirical universe and then sticking to them. The contradictions were not arbitrary plot holes, they were deliberate revelations about how propaganda works in the real world. Authoritarian governments always present their enemies as simultaneously too strong to ignore and too weak to deserve respect. The bugs had to be dangerous enough to justify total war, but primitive enough to make human victory seem inevitable. The film's treatment of casualty numbers demonstrates this principle perfectly. The Federation celebrates capturing the brain bug as a great victory, but the cost was the destruction of an entire fleet and the deaths of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Any rational society would consider this a catastrophic defeat, but the propaganda system spins it as a triumph. The characters celebrate because they've been trained to measure success by symbolic victories, rather than actual strategic gains. Verhoeven understood that effective satire requires audiences to do the intellectual work themselves. The film provides all the information needed to recognize the contradictions, but it doesn't explicitly point them out or provide easy answers. Viewers who want can enjoy the spectacular action without engaging with the deeper implications. Those who pay attention discover a complex critique of militarism, propaganda, and the seductive appeal of fascist ideology. Visual storytelling that supported the message. Starship Troopers succeeded where other sci-fi films failed because every visual choice supported its satirical message. The Federation's clean, sterile environments looked utopian on the surface, but revealed fascist undertones through careful design choices. The uniforms were sleek and appealing, while subtly echoing Nazi aesthetics. The architecture was impressive and modern while feeling coldly authoritarian. This visual sophistication was completely beyond films like Battlefield Earth, whose technical failures became legendary. The film's overuse of Dutch angles was not a stylistic choice. It was director Roger Christian's mistaken belief that tilted cameras automatically create visual interest. The result was a nauseating viewing experience that distracted from an already weak story. The creature design in Starship Troopers was particularly brilliant. Phil Tippett created bugs that were both spectacular to watch and thematically perfect, because they were designed to be completely unsympathetic, reinforcing how propaganda is supposed to dehumanize the other, the enemies. The bugs had no culture, no individual personality, no redeeming qualities at all. They existed purely as objects for humans to destroy, which was exactly the point. Compare this to After Earth, which spent $130 million on CGI environments and creatures but created nothing memorable or thematically relevant. The film's evolved animals were generic movie monsters with no deeper meaning, existing only to provide obstacles for Jaden Smith to overcome. Without a thematic purpose, even expensive effects can feel hollow. The long game. The most remarkable achievement of Starship Troopers was how it anticipated future developments in both politics and entertainment. The film's depiction of a society that derives unity from perpetual war against a dehumanized enemy proved eerily prescient after 9/11. Its portrayal of slick media manipulation became increasingly relevant as social media and partisan news sources transformed political discourse. While the big-budget failures surrounding its release have been completely forgotten, Starship Troopers has only grown in cultural significance. The film's influence can be seen in everything from video games like Helldivers 2 that directly homage its satirical militarism to the countless memes and references that keep its dialogue alive in internet culture. Phrases like, "I'm doing my part," and "Would you like to know more?" have become shorthand for recognizing and mocking propaganda techniques. The film successfully embedded itself in the cultural conversation in ways that purely entertaining blockbusters rarely achieve. Meanwhile, films like Supernova and Wing Commander exist now only as footnotes in discussions of box office disasters. They had bigger marketing budgets and wider releases than Starship Troopers, but they lacked the substance that creates lasting cultural impact. The legacy of Starship Troopers proves that the most successful films aren't always the ones that succeed immediately. Sometimes the movies that challenge audiences, that risk being misunderstood, that prioritized artistic integrity over focus group approval, are the ones that endure long after the safe, expensive blockbusters have been completely forgotten. But hey, that's just our opinion. What do you think? Could Hollywood make another film as subversive and lasting as Starship Troopers today? Or has the industry become so risk-averse that it could never greenlight genuine artistic statements? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into cinema's most fascinating successes and failures. This video is made by movie fans, for movie fans.